To say that my parents were an insane bunch would be an understatement. I genuinely believe with every fiber of my being that my parents think I'm some kind of hellspawn from the depths of hell. Because of this, I've not only tried to keep my personal life under wraps whenever I was around them, but would also have to constantly be subjugated to the various religious and theocratic bullshit that my parents would constantly harp on me throughout my life. Let me explain. I was raised by a pair of insane fundamentalist Christians who basically believed that the world was out to get them, and that any opportunity they had in their daily lives was to try and get people and force it upon me to accept Jesus as their personal savior before they all went to hell for eternity. Not only that, but like with other fundamentalists, they forbade any kind of video games, cartoons that weren't biblical based, most food that wasn't organic. Yes, I'm not joking. They thought that non-organic food was a creation of Satan, and pretty much made me read the Bible front and back in my spare time, rather than hanging out with friends or doing any other kind of extracurricular activity. Ugh. It was honestly a good thing they never actually had the opportunity to homeschool me, but I think that was a lot more of a thorn on their side than anything. Due to the constant restrictions that were harped into my life, as well as the beatings I would receive from my father every time I so much as either said anything or tried to defend myself from either him or my mother, my life was very troubled. For anyone wondering, yes, I tried to call CPS a few times, but my father would threaten me so often every time I did it that when they actually arrived to do an investigation, I'd have to lie to them and say that everything was perfectly okay, when in all due reality, it wasn't. It's pretty ironic, though. Church, for at least a small period of my life, was actually the only time in my frantic week that I actually got a bit of a break from my parents' abusiveness, and the wrath of the prayer groups that would come over to my house on a daily basis and exorcise me from all the, quote, unholy slug snake demons. Yes, they actually believed that kind of shit. During this time at church, when I was pretty young, one of the cartoons that we'd watch in Sunday school was Veggietales. Now, Veggietales was pretty much the only thing I actually enjoyed when I was a kid. I mean, it meant a lot to me when I was young, especially even now. I mean, I really don't care for the biblical messages that they portrayed, but it was still a pretty good show all in all. It was definitely a breath of fresh air every time I watched Bob and Larry go on their little adventures and whatnot with the other characters. Sadly, though, my little ray of sunshine that I enjoyed was quickly snuffed out when my parents decided to make me go with them to quote-unquote big church, or in this case, the main worship service where my brainwashing truly began. Now here's the thing about this church that I went to. It wasn't exactly a multi-billion-dollar mega church, nor was it even something really that interesting. In fact, the entire church and the building right beside it was actually a former Catholic monastery run by a Catholic Benedictine order back in the 50s, which promptly shut down in the late 60s due to lack of attendance. When the building was first acquired by the church, the pastor, who I'll get into later, as well as my parents and most of the congregation, practically went haywire in trying to remove the, quote, graven images and quote-unquote idols the church and monastery had. I mean, think of it, they did it. Every cross, every crucifix, every icon, any kind of thing that they didn't like, they took it and they burned it. If they couldn't burn it, they smashed it to bits. They did everything in their power to get rid of everything there. Hell, they even managed to somehow get rid of the altars that were practically walled into the place, that couldn't even be removed. I think even the pastor himself took a sledgehammer to the main altar there. Never was cleaned up last time I checked. I think the main reason for that was because of the fact that the pastor wanted to use the crumbled altar as like an example of breaking down demonic whatever it was, some kind of crap that he was spewing out from the pulpit. I mean, anything that was there was whitewashed as well, until it became nothing else more but an empty, cold, gray area. just like my fucking life. And to say that it didn't upset me would be a lie. I mean, everything in there was just downright beautiful. I didn't understand why they were doing it. Now, funny thing, I actually wound up taking a small crucifix that had actually fallen from a side altar that was being torn down, and I kept it in my pocket for a good bit. That is until my parents had wound up finding out about it, and they made me not only sit there and smash it with a hammer, it was made of metal, before my father wound up beating me black and blue for idolatry and then forcing me to participate in an exorcism service to cleanse the house of its evil presence that happened with the cross. I still haven't forgiven him for doing that to me. In fact, I wouldn't say I've forgiven any one of them for doing the things that they did to me, but this is one of the reasons why I downright fucking hate their guts. I mean, all of that insanity because of a small crucifix. Funny little fact though, I had actually managed to get the broken crucifix out of the garbage that it was tossed into, and I actually managed to kind of sort of fix it back up. I mean, it was metal, so it was mostly dented, but I was able to get the, body part, basically the little Jesus that was on there, and particularly Gorilla Glue it back onto the thing, because it popped off during the time that my dad had forced me to break it into pieces, which didn't work. I mean, and it's funny, even now, despite the fact that I'm a theistic Satanist, I still wear it around my neck. More of a keepsake than anything, still pretty nice. Now getting back to the topic on hand, Veggietales was one of my favorite shows growing up. My parents hated it, and a few times I actually had to try to demand the pastor to have them burn the DVDs and things like that for the amount of heresy with the God loves you lie and things like that. They were crazy people. They genuinely were. And while I really hated that stupid pastor that was there, he actually had a little bit of a brain in him and told them to pretty much get out of his office because he wasn't planning on doing that. So of course, that pretty much was the case. But one day on my 16th birthday, after practically getting anointing oil splashed all over my head the day as a blessing present, I'd wind up taking my bike out of the garage and thoroughly making sure of it that I got whatever oil was in my hair out of it, and then began making my way downtown. I had managed to get $20 in the mail from my aunt, who had given it to me rather discreetly, pretty much disguising it, because she knew for a full-on fact that if my parents got a hold of it, they would take it away from me and use it to fund their church. Now, at this point in time, the only thing I wanted to do was pretty much just go out and enjoy myself for my birthday, as I didn't exactly have any kind of other plans out there, because my parents hated the idea of having birthday parties and things like that, despite the fact that they had many anniversaries with one another. Terrible time. Really terrible time in my life. And at this point, I'm gonna be honest. I honestly had pretty much become an atheist at that point. For temporary time. Because I was sick and tired of my family's religious bullcrap, I was sick of the lies, I was sick of everything else. And basically, the one thing I wanted to make sure that I did that day was go to my local thrift store and see if I could buy anything regarding to Richard Dawkins, Stephen Hawking, or even Anton LaVey, if I could find it. However, just as I was making my way towards the thrift store, I came across one of those Christian bookstores, Lifeway if I remember correctly, and saw that they were having one of those promotions for the holidays that were coming up that year. On the poster in the window, in bold lettering it read, "Celebrate the birth of Christ this year with our brand new inventory of beautiful wall crosses, movies, games, Bibles, and more. All 15% off this month until Christmas." Now, I knew for a fact that going into that store and trying to get something was a bit of a risk for, obvious reasons, but I really had no intention of going home anytime soon, so I pulled up my bike to the store and decided to go around, browse, and just kind of dick around for a bit. Upon entering the bookstore, I was met with the clean, cool scent of various cleaning supplies, air conditioning, and air freshener all combined together. It wasn't a bad smell, a bit overpowering at times, but still one I wound up getting used to. For the next few hours or so, I just browsed around the store, reading various books from fraud pastors, leaders, chick tracts that were scattered all over the place, including one that was right next to a toilet, funny enough, and then proceeding to laugh my ass off at the multiple idiotic, ridiculous ideologies that these people were spewing out, and the so-called visions of hell and the contradictions that each one of them particularly had with each and every book that they had there. And of course, all the other things that were basically just there as a money-grubbing tactic for all the gullible idiots out there that think that going out there and buying this magical, holy oil will sit there and get them wealthy. Yeah, it was funny, but at the same time pretty sad. A couple of employees had actually wound up coming to me and asking me if I really needed anything, but I told them that I was just there to browse for a bit and just enjoy my day, and they left me alone for the time being. As I kept on looking around the aisles, I came across the kids section of the place, where I was met with various DVDs and collectibles for Veggietales, and apparently their newest reboot, Veggietales in the House, which, honestly, I'm not gonna lie, creeped me out due to the newer models of the characters looking so wrong. I soon made my way down a random aisle and was met with the DVD section of the place. There I was met with various DVDs, box sets, and the like for various Christian shows and movies. It was then that I found the clearance section at the end of the aisle, and I actually wound up finding a box set of Season 2 of Veggietales for about a good $14. I debated with myself if I honestly wanted to buy this, given the fact that I knew my parents really wouldn't approve of the show, but in a nice little fit of rebellion, I grabbed the set without any questions or thought, went to the counter and bought it without any issues. When I went home that day with all of my things, I was thankful to know that my mother was the only one when I had gotten back at the house. I mean, sure, she's about as much of a pain in my ass as my father, but she was a lot easier to sneak things past by that I needed. So I managed to sneak through the garage door, into my bathroom, and then to my bedroom without any problems or quips from my mother. Upon reaching my bedroom, I quickly got the DVDs and the books that I had bought from the thrift store, and I quickly hid them in the locked box that I had underneath my bed that I kept in a small compartment near the edge of my bed. Basically, that was there to make sure of it that my parents could never find whatever it is that I had. There really wasn't much in there, mostly just books, a couple of little satanic Bibles here and there, and a couple of other ritualistic items that I wound up getting off of a friend of mine that I liked using, but I kept it all there just to make sure of it that they wouldn't find out. Now, of course, as for the DVDs, I obviously couldn't watch them at the time, due to the fact that my mother surely would have had the whole thing, should have wound up hearing the whole thing and then found me out, and then got rid of it, as well as my other stuff, and the fact of the matter that I didn't have a TV in there because, well, they were pretty controlling about who got to watch the TV. So I had to wait for at least a good 3 months before I was finally able to have some time for myself. That one day of freedom that I had, both of my parents had gone out for their monthly Bible study and worship at the church. I was left to myself for the rest of the night, which thankfully they actually did this one time. I guess it was because of the fact that they just didn't bother wanting to take me there, which was fine with me. And since I knew that these things tend to last for at least a good 3 hours due to there being a dinner provided, I was pretty much free to watch the DVDs that I had bought. So I pulled out the box with the disc and went downstairs into the living room, the only place that we had a TV, and started watching them on the family DVD player that we had. For the next hour or so, I simply sat back and relaxed as I watched episode after episode of Bob and Larry having various adventures and the like, reliving my childhood and eating whatever organic crap snacks I could get my hands on at the time. Well, fast forward around the 2-hour mark, and all the episodes had pretty much been completed. That is until I wound up getting to a couple of bonus episodes that were listed in the DVD menu under the same name. There were only 3 episodes in total in that section, but one of them actually caught my eye and seemed really interesting. The title of this episode was called The Great Awakening, and it was the last option on the list of bonus episodes. I figured that I'd wind up giving it a shot and see what it was all about. The episode started off with the intro to the song, with the same dialogue and credits the show usually played, as Bob and Larry pretty much argued about what exactly they were going to do. That is before Larry wound up going up with the tuba in hand and pretty much doing the intro before falling to the ground completely out of breath at the last of it, with the kids laughing in the background. The scene then faded back to show the usual startup of the show, with Bob and Larry in the kitchen counter, ready to start up the episode as usual. Hi everyone, and welcome to Veggietales. I'm Bob the Tomato, Bob began, and I'm Larry the Cucumber, Larry said as well. And we're here today to answer your questions, Bob said. I smiled at the familiar intro as usual. I was pretty much in for a nice little treat. So, Bob, what letter do we have today? Larry asked. Well, today, Larry, actually, I haven't checked the mail today. I should go and see if we have anything particularly new, Bob said as he made his way towards the left side of the screen, pretty much going off screen before quickly being stopped with Larry saying, Wait, Bob, you don't need to do that, Larry said as he hopped over towards the right side of the screen to get something. What? Bob asked, confused. I always go get the mail. Not anymore, Larry yelled off screen before coming back into the scene with a large contraption with a springy hand that apparently extended itself. Larry, what is that thing? Bob asked, confused. Oh, well, this is a new invention that I made, called the Letter Grabber 2000, Larry announced as an angelic light and sound shined over the machine itself. Huh, interesting. So, how does it work? Bob asked. Like this, Larry said as his non-existent arms went and pushed the big red button on the back of it. Then, just as the machine started to expand the mechanical hand to the side of the screen, the machine suddenly started to spark and sputter around, and then, like that, it just died, much to Larry's dismay. Aw, every time, Larry said as he slumped to the ground. I see that there might have been a few screws loose with that machine, wasn't there, Larry? Bob said as he made his way towards Larry. Yeah, every time I try fixing this thing, everything always goes wrong and it just dies. I mean, why can't it just last? Larry said, defeated. Well, you know, Larry, not everything lasts forever, Bob said as he pulled out a letter from his side. Hey, where did you get that? Larry asked. Oh, well, I got it when we went to go get your machine, Bob said. Oh, okay. Oh, what's the letter say? Larry asked as he tossed the machine to the side in a comedic manner. Let's see. Oh, yes. Today's letter is from Riley Martin of Tampa, Florida. She writes, Dear Bob and Larry, I'm having a really bad week recently. You see, my hamster Snuggles passed away a few days ago, and I really miss him a lot. I was wondering, will I ever see him again? Love, Riley. Well, Riley, it seems as though this one's a rather interesting kind of question. I think you and Larry could honestly use a story to answer your questions. I present to you all The Great Awakening. And with that, the scene faded out, and then faded back in to show a rather modern-looking city structure, with the camera panning over different parts of the city before making its way towards a cemetery, with Junior Asparagus, Mr. and Mrs. Asparagus, and lastly Bob and Larry standing over a grave. Well, Larry and the others, Bob was actually standing on top of the grave. Junior looked rather upset, and Bob was, well, like I said, on top of the grave giving a bit of a eulogy. Friends, we are gathered here today to mourn the sudden passing of Junior's pet snail Slick. He was a good snail and did everything well in being a good pet. We hope that one day that we will see Slick again in paradise. And with that, Bob hopped down from the headstone and then made his way over towards Larry, who was comically blowing his nose. Yeah, he was a good snail too, Larry said, sniffling. Come on, Larry. We need to get going, Bob said. Both Larry and Bob then made their way out of the cemetery and then made their way towards the gate that left the cemetery. Junior and his parents were the only ones that stayed behind. The scene then cut to Junior's grief-stricken face as he stared down at the gravestones next to him. I'm gonna miss him so much, Dad, Junior said, crying. I know, Junior, but don't worry. Like Bob said, we'll see him again soon, Mr. Asparagus said. Come now, Junior. We need to go. We have to go and start dinner, Mrs. Asparagus said. With that, all three of the Asparagus family made their way out of the cemetery and then proceeded to make their way to the car and soon drive home. I can certainly say that this episode was definitely starting off on a rather down note, but at the same time, it just made me a bit more invested in this episode. The scene then faded in and then showed Junior getting tucked into bed by his father. As Mr. Asparagus was about to leave Junior's room, Junior then called his dad back over and then proceeded to ask him about what they were going to see when they were going to see Slick again. Junior's father then proceeded to go over to Junior's bookshelf and then grab a book from there, the Bible, and then opened up to a verse from it. I think this verse from Revelation should likely answer your question, sport. Revelation 26. Blessed and holy is he who has part of the first resurrection. Over the second death has no power, but they shall be priests of God and of Christ, who shall reign with him 1,000 years. I don't know exactly what this verse was really trying to say or what it was trying to convey, but apparently it seemed to make Junior a bit happier, to which he honestly just lied back down and said, "Thanks, Dad. I feel a lot better now. I know that God will bring Slick back again soon." Junior's father then told his son that he loved him, and then proceeded to walk out of the room. While Junior fell asleep with the Bible next to him, as Junior winds up falling asleep, a white light quickly envelops the whole room, which soon dissipates into nothing rather quickly. Then, without a single warning, a loud trumpet sound blasts out of the TV speakers, which made me jump the first time I heard it. Junior immediately woke up from this and proceeds to start looking around, wondering what in the world was going on and where the sudden sound came from. When that had happened, a large earthquake quickly started to shake the whole screen. Junior then proceeded to go into full-on panic mode at this point, as the screen continued to shake. Then everything went quiet. Junior then immediately left his room after that, and then proceeded to run down the stairs to try and find where his parents were at and see if they were okay. As he did this, a loud booming voice called out saying, "Come out, ye elect of the Lord." Then a bright flash of light illuminated around Junior for a bit, before a pure white robe immediately popped up onto Junior, covering the majority of his body except for his face. "Huh? How did it get this robe on me?" Junior asked as he made his way over towards where his parents' bedroom was at. However, Junior didn't need to open it up, as both of his parents, with wild smiles on their faces and the same bright white robes, walked out and then turned their heads to face Junior. "Mom, Dad, what's going on? Why was there an earthquake? Why is everything all bright? And why am I wearing a white robe?" Junior said, panicked. "It's okay, Junior. You don't need to be afraid. We're all going to be with God soon," Mr. Asparagus said as he picked his son up from the ground, while Mrs. Asparagus proceeded to lead them into the living room. "What? What do you mean? Am I dead?" Junior says, now freaking out even more. Mr. and Mrs. Asparagus chuckle a bit, but soon say, No, Junior. You're still very much alive. Where we're all going, death will no longer exist, and all tears shall be wiped away from everyone's eyes, and everything will truly be perfect again," Mr. Asparagus said softly. Junior, as well as myself, seemed to be a little bit more confused about everything that was going on. That is until Mr. and Mrs. Asparagus proceeded to open up the door and walk out into their front yard. And there, the answer had already been given away that had made even my own jaw drop to the ground with what I saw. Everything was destroyed, or at least was in the process of being destroyed. Buildings were on fire, flaming balls of fire and the likes were crashing down near screaming characters who were attempting to run away from the carnage. Some even laid still on the cracked streets as hands proceeded to come out of the freaking streets and push them all down into wherever they were going. A few of them just sat there and shook, but otherwise not really moving. The houses, with the sole exception of Junior's and a couple of others, were all destroyed and rendered completely useless in its own self. Not even well enough to provide shelter. The sky itself looked about as blackened can be. No stars, no moon, nothing but darkness. with the sole exception of a bright light that went out from the distance. This obviously had scared Junior and no doubt left him with more questions than answers. D- d- Dad, what's happening? Junior asked, now cowering from the scene that he was presented with. You need not worry, Junior. This is the last judgment of the Lord, remember? You know that story from the Bible that I taught you at church, right? Mrs. Asparagus asked. Oh, I remember now. But why doesn't everybody have white robes that like we have on? Junior asked as his parents continued to walk down where a very large hill was at. I'm afraid, Junior, that their names weren't written in the Book of Life. If their names aren't on there, they'll have to go somewhere else. Junior's father remarked. Where's that at? Junior asked. Where are they gonna go? To the grill of burning coals and fire to be grilled forever, Junior's father answered. After that little tidbit of information, the trio of asparagus finally made their way to the top of the hill, where a bright and wondrous light enveloped the whole top part of the hill. On the right side of it were various Veggietale characters all dressed up in white robes. Bob, Larry, Petunia, Jerry Gourd, Jimmy Gourd, Laura, and a few others that I couldn't really remember their names. On the left side of it, guarded by many demons in the shape of grills with devil horns, tails, and long, lengthy black arms and pitchforks in their hands, were Mr. Lunt, Archibald Asparagus, the Three Scallions, and Mr. Nezer, followed by a plethora of many other people that I didn't even know who they were. They all looked about as terrified and rather miserable as they could. Suddenly, a soft but firm voice called out and said, To my right hand I say unto thee, Enter ye into the house of my Father that was prepared for you since the beginning. Come and enjoy paradise. You are my child. Come and be happy. There was much cheering going on within the crowd in the white robes for a good few minutes, as they all proceeded to embrace one another. Even Junior himself seemed to be rather happy, and actually wound up finding, his little pet snail that was in a cute little white robe and everything, and was just pretty much enjoying their time. Then the camera cut to the people on the left side of the group looking genuinely afraid. As for you on the left who have denied my love and grace and my Son Jesus Christ, depart from me and never return, for I never knew you. You are cursed in my face, and you shall be roasted in the fire with the devil and his minions. Then without fail, a large crater wind up opening up, and a giant makeshift grill wind up opening up and swallowing everybody on the left side of the mountain just like that. The episode then faded out and then went back to Bob and Larry. Now, at this point in time, I think the DVD wound up glitching out a bit, because I wasn't able to really get to the verse from Cordy or what they learned today. But I was able to skip it to the part where they say their final goodbyes by saying, Remember, God made you special and he loves you very much. And with that, Bob and Larry left the scene and the episode ended. Now, normally this kind of thing would make any kind of person particularly shit themselves or really unnerve them, especially if they were practically die-hard religious people. But for me, this was likely one of the funniest things that I had honestly seen in my life. If anything, it basically was the main reason why I wound up turning to theistic Satanism to begin with. I don't know how or why that a show like Veggietales managed to do that, but it did. Funny, right? As for everything else after that, I pretty much wound up putting the DVDs away after that. Not wanting to get caught by my parents and, beaten. I was actually doing pretty good with hiding the thing for at least a good few weeks. That is until my mom had wound up doing some spring cleaning while I was at school. And not only did she wind up finding the keepsake box that I had, but also the DVDs and the other various books that I had, ranging from Richard Dawkins to Anton LaVey to the Satanic Bible and basically a lot of stuff. and a few other things of a personal nature. When I got home that day, I found out via my dad that everything that I had in my box, including my DVDs, had been confiscated and thoroughly burned to the ground out in the backyard. The lashing I wound up receiving was one that left permanent scars on my back, my face, and lastly my legs. He even decided that that apparently wasn't enough and proceeded to beat me with his fist until he wound up breaking my fucking arm in the process, or at least spraining it. No, they didn't take me to the hospital, and they instead decided to drag me over to their church literally an hour after that, where I was met with the pastor. You know how I said that that there was much more to this guy that I was going to describe? Well, this may come as a bit of a shocker or not, but this man was truly evil incarnate. The pastor, Pastor Mike, made even the likes of Steven Anderson from Faithful Word Baptist Church and Fred fucking Phelps look like absolute saints and holy people compared to him. He was the kind of person that would sit there and exercise you, do everything that he could, and do anything to hurt you, just so he could gain something out of it. In fact, last time I checked, he actually had been arrested not too long back for assaulting numerous children in the daycare because he thought that there were demons inside of them. But what he did to me was he exorcised me and doused me with olive oil all over the place. No matter what I said or did, my pleas were ignored when I told them, and I told him that I had a broken arm. And it certainly didn't help when my parents were pulling at my arms, especially the one that was broken, trying to hold me down. Honestly, I can certainly say that the amount of pain I went through was awful. The fact that I didn't pass out after that was just a miracle in of its own self. The exorcisms and shit like that lasted for a good 4.5 hours, with me practically crying my eyes out and begging my parents to just let me go and take me to the hospital, which even after all that, they didn't. When I wound up getting home, I was taken to my room and locked in there with the Bible on one of the tables. My arm hurt really badly, and I saw that it was practically swelling up from the pain and everything else that I wound up going through. So the one thing that I wound up doing, in a fit of rage, I took the Bible and I threw it across the room and proceeded to spit on it repeatedly, and then smash it into the doorway, and then I opened up my bedroom door and then proceeded to leave the house. And I didn't stop running until a couple of people in their cars saw that I was in deep pain. They were wonderful Samaritans, and they took me to the hospital, where I was thankfully kept and taken and kept from losing my arm. A cast was put on there, and, well, everything kind of went out fine after that, at least for the time being that was in the hospital. Unfortunately, my parents never got arrested for the actions that they had committed against me. Even when charges were filed, they didn't exactly have to suffer with any of the consequences of what they did, because the church that they went to had paid for the best lawyer that they could afford, pretty much wanting to make sure of it that none of them went to prison for their just behavior. They never even apologized, whatsoever. I was pretty much stuck with them again after the case, and I was soon brought home. I didn't do much of anything after that. Instead, I literally ran to my room and locked my door. My dad tried numerous times to get in the room to beat me again, but this time around, I wasn't gonna fucking have it. I had barricaded my door with my bed to make sure of it that no one could go in. I packed whatever shit that I had, well, at least what was left of it, got out of the window once more, and I left. I ran into the woods and I hid there for as long as I could. I never wanted to go back there, and I never have any intentions of it. And honestly, I can say that I'm doing fine now. I managed to get myself into a homeless shelter, and thus, due to my young age, I was taken to, well, the police, And compared to the other police individuals and people like that who didn't really listen to my case too well, these people did. My parents actually wound up going to jail for their actions. Though they're in there for life. They're not getting out, which is amazing. I was adopted by a family who genuinely treated me well, who gave me the love and attention that I needed, who didn't sit there and beat me every time I didn't read the Bible. In fact, they were actually really open about my newfound religion and everything recently. I've had so many issues with them. I've gone through psychological evaluations and various other things. Diagnosed with PTSD as well, so there's that. But even then, I can certainly say that me leaving there was probably the best thing I've ever done in my life. And you know what? I don't regret a single thing that I've done. I'll never regret it, and the day I ever do regret it will be the end of May.
In fear and surprise, as your eyes widen, your mouth goes dry with each battered breath. You try to scream, your mind begs to leave, glued to your computer screen. The killers they slash, the tapes burn and crash. The cartridge you bought will be your final haunt. The rituals of hate will seal your fate. The tears you shed will be from the fear-gripping, horror-driven, nightmarish, gore-filled, terrorizing, hateful, burning, violent, rage-inducing, knife-slashing, blood-splattering, silent screams. Only time will tell if you will escape this online hell. Your horror-filled obsessions will come with its own regressions. Your pathetic screams will not be heeded in any way, because your nightmares will come at any day.